All right, everyone can hear me now, I guess. Yes?
Yes.
All right, cool. Hey, welcome to livejazzkc.com and our Convo Improvvo series of interviews, conversations, relaxed talks, however you want to look at it. I'm Herschel McWilliams, Live Jazz KC, and this is another installment of this great series we put together thanks to the wonderful hosts we continue to have week to week for now for months and months and months, Mr. Rob Scheps. And I can't even begin to guess how many of these we have stacked up, but it's a lot and they're all great. And
40.
40. Well, there we go. 40 is a lot.
It's a lot of, right.
Yeah, man. And so it's good. Having this archive has been wonderful. And tonight is no exception. We are excited to have Bryan Carrott, vibraphonist, composer, educator, renowned, here with us to hear about his story and his inspirations in his life and his career with Rob. Again, we certainly appreciate any donations that can be made to the musicians taking part in these talks. And that can be done through Venmo. And I will have the Venmo link in the comments section and description of the video here, as well as through livejazzkc.com/donate. Again, always appreciated, never required, but certainly these are tough times for everybody, and musicians are affected more than most because all of their streams of income have been depleted. So with no further ado, let me introduce you one last time here, Mr. Bryan Carrott and Rob Scheps. Thanks, guys. I'll be here waiting.
Thank you, Herschel. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Live Jazz KC. And on the other end here, we have my old friend and bandmate, colleague, one of my favorite musicians, vibraphonist Bryan Carrott. Can you hear me, Bryan?
Loud and clear.
All right, baby. Yeah,
You hear me?
You can hear me, no?
You hear me
So
now?
actually, Bryan and I have a little bit of history. One thing is the band that Kim Clark and I have co-led for 20 years called Magnets. Bryan is our third constant wheel. And we have kind of a Spinal Tap-esque rotation of drummers. not that anything bad happens to them, but there hasn't been a set drummer in the band for a long time. But anyway, so Bryan and I play together there, and we also used to work together kind of more like in the 90s, early 2000s with Bob Moses, great drummer in Boston. And we made a wonderful CD with Moses together called Time Stood Still that kind of featured me and Bryan fairly well. And then we also performed in New York City with that band a little bit also, right?
Yes. Yeah. In New York. But did you do any of the gigs in Boston with him?
Well, I had done a bunch of gigs with him in Boston when I lived there before I met you, before I moved to New York.
After we did the recording.
I don't remember. I couldn't say, but do you remember when we did the recording, the core band was two bass players, Yossi Fine and Matthew Garrison and/or Wesley Worth, and then Moses on drums, Miles Evans on trumpet, me on tenor primarily, and you on vibes. And that was kind of the core quintet of the whole thing. But yeah. Do you remember later in New York, we used to rehearse in the West Beth basement, and Moses put together a new band with you and him and I think Wesley on bass. And the horn section was pretty interesting. It was me on tenor, Alex Sipiagin on trumpet, and Art Barron on trombone. But I don't think, aside from maybe a couple of gigs, we got too far with that band, which is a shame.
Yeah, I remember driving. I remember driving Art Barron up to Boston to hit with him, and maybe one or two other times I got up there to hit with some configuration of that group with Bob.
Sure.
But we did a gig with you once too, just like a quartet gig in Wichita.
In Wichita, Kansas?
No, not Wichita. No. Salem. Salem. The Witch Place in Massachusetts.
Man, you've been in quarantine so long you don't even know where the states are. I know what you mean, man. Salem, Massachusetts. Yes.
You should be good at geography too.
Salem. Well, not now. 48 or 50 Americans cannot identify the states.
Wow. Oh shoot.
So Salem, Massachusetts, maybe it was a club that was there for a minute called the Red Room. That was a nice place to play. That could have been it. I don't know.
You had who's up there? Australian, the bass player.
I don't remember an Australian bass player. I don't know. We can get to it. I'll tell you what, Brian. I'm going to start.
Lockwood.
Oh, John Lockwood. He was South African. John.
South African. Okay.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a wonderful quartet. I'm sorry I can't remember it. You know, I'm having gigheimers.
You played your ass off. That's all I know.
Well, thanks. And you do it every time we play. So Brian, you know, I know most of your kind of like adult professional name dropping kind of history. I don't know that much early stuff. I mean, I grew up on Long Island, and did you also grow up in Queens or Nassau County, close to the city?
I grew up in Queens. I live in Nassau County now. I just live in Valley Stream.
And Valley Stream, of course, it's nice Long Island, but it's real close to Queens border, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, all right. So and so the interesting thing is in that band Magnets that we have, you and Kim Clark are both real Queens natives. You've been there. You know, you grew up there, you've been there your whole lives. And of course, it's easy access to New York City, but it is whatever it is locally. And I feel that you're easily one of the 3 or 5, now that we've lost Bobby Hutcherson and Milt Jackson, one of the most important vibes players in jazz, along with Steve Nelson and Joe Locke and a few other folks. I'm sure some of the younger cats, Stefan Harris, Warren Wolf. But I guess I was going to ask you, how old were you when you chose the vibraphone? Was it your first instrument? And did you choose it yourself, or did a band director or a parent choose it for you?
I started out on piano as a little guy.
Okay.
My grandfather gave me my first piano when I was like 5. And I started taking lessons when I was almost 8. And then in junior high school and middle school, actually Graham Haynes and I went to the same junior high school.
No kidding.
He's a year younger than me, and but we played in what they call the dance band together, and that's when I really started to enjoy perform. Oh, I started playing drums there.
Okay. Oh, excuse me. Let me interject real quick. Just for those who don't know, who may be watching this, who are fans, you know, not musicians, Graham Haynes. Incredible. You think of him as a trumpet player, but really a cornet player. That's his main instrument, I believe. And he's an amazingly original musician, and he is the son of Roy Haynes. And Graham, he's on a lot of great atmospheric, funky records with Bill Laswell, and he's done a lot of very creative things in his own style. I think Graham is an innovator, not just a great player.
Right, yeah.
At this point, but so I'm sorry. So back in school with Graham now.
Yeah, so you know, you had a choice of trying to, because you know, you don't just go into a music program in a school and say you're going to play piano. So everybody has to choose an instrument, and I had on my list flute, drums, and clarinet or something like that. I don't remember. So I tried flute first, and you know, basically the teacher holds it and you blowing it, trying to get a sound out of it, and after the room stopped spinning, you know, like I was getting so winded and I wasn't getting no sound. I said, I think I'll try the drums. And so I played drums in junior high school. Sometimes there were little bell parts, you know, there was no vibraphone or xylophone there. And sometimes a little bit of timpani. And then, you know, the teacher was very, you know, he just had a way with music and having kids enjoy it. Actually, Tom Brown went there too, but he's a little older than me.
Tom Brown, the trumpet player, the kind of fusion cat.
Yeah. And
Okay.
And you know, Craig Haynes went there, Roy's son, and Marcus Gilmore, Roy's grandson. And so you know, students would audition for performing arts, music and art, and that's what happened. Me and 2 other friends auditioned for music and art, and I auditioned on piano.
And Ellen, I'm sorry, again, folks who don't know, those are 2 incredibly competitive, high level. If you've ever seen the movie Fame, that's what it's about. It's that movie was a conflation of high school of music and art and high school of performing arts, known to New Yorkers like us as PA or M&A, right?
Right. Now they call it LaGuardia.
Well, so long story short, which one did you go to?
I went to music and art.
Okay.
And you know, at my audition, they said, I remember very well. He was a pianist organist who was my theory teacher, but I used to see him playing at funerals and different things in the city. He said, "Oh, I see on your application you were playing drums in junior high school. Would you like to be in the percussion? Would you be interested in being in the percussion department?" It's you know, I was a spaced out kid. You know, I just said okay. And you know, Justin DeChocho.
I know he was one of my great teachers also
Yeah.
with the McDonald's band. You know, I wasn't in the city, but yeah, Justin DeChocho is a major jazz educator and a very positive force who turns a lot of kids on to music.
Exactly. Yeah. And for some people it was a turnaround to their lives, really.
Sure.
And, we gave a big tribute to him a few years ago, around 2014 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was called 40 Years of Jazz Fame, and all of these people came back to play. You know, Kenny Washington, Eric McPherson, Marcus Gilmore, Marcus Miller.
Now let me ask you a question. Are you a little younger than those guys, than Omar and Marcus Miller?
Omar and I were in the same class. I met Omar through my friend from junior high school. They had worked in a summer program together, some summer day camp in Queens. I never knew, you know, I just met when we were in the same class, same theory class or something like that. And then one day, my friend from junior high school comes to me and says, "We might have a chance to meet Stevie Wonder." And I was like, "Get out of here." He says, "No, you know this guy, Omar?" I said, "I think so." He was the only guy in the school that looked like he was a teacher. On his first day of school, you know, he's got a beard and everything. People are coming up to him asking him where their class is. He's like, "Oh no, I'm looking for my class too." You know, so yeah, I got into the percussion department. So that's where I discovered the mallet instruments. You know, really the vibraphone, and I just took to it, fell in love with it. You know, immediately it became that thing where like the combination of the percussive, the melodic, and the harmonic. Eventually, the harmonic. I didn't know you could play it with 4 sticks till I saw another student. Daniel Druckmann was a percussionist trained as a child. He came into the school playing Flight of the Bumblebee for his audition or something like that. And he's
on marimba, maybe.
Yeah. And he's in the Philharmonic now. His dad, I think, was a clarinet player in the Philharmonic.
Oh, he's the son of Stanley Drucker.
No.
No?
Is it?
Stanley Drucker was the principal clarinet in the New York.
Yeah, I'm getting that mixed up. No, his name is Druckmann. Yeah.
Okay.
So he's not that's not his dad. Yeah, I used to get that mixed up. That's me. But yeah, that's how I met, you know, so Omar came up to me in class and he said, "Are you Bryan Carrott?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "So you guys are gonna hang out with me we were going to SIR." Omar was already in a band that used to rehearse at SIR, and they used to keep their gear there because they rehearsed so much. And he had heard that Stevie was gonna be there rehearsing. So we went down there with him, but then he said, let me check out the room and see what the vibe is like and see if I can just bring you all in. And he went in and, you know, we were waiting outside the room, and after about, I don't know how long, and he came out and said, "Yeah, I don't think it's going to work out," you know. So then we go, we see him in school the next day, and I said, "So how did it go? Did you get to meet Stevie?" He said, "Yeah, man, I could have got y'all in. I was afraid." You know, he said he ended up jamming with him and everything.
Oh man.
He said when he met Stevie, you know, it's just crazy that I can remember this stuff. You know, like we're talking now 40 years ago.
But it made an impression, right, Brian?
Yeah. Everything, you know, like I tell Omar, he says, "Get out of here, man." You know, like I told him, he you know, he's big part of responsibility for me getting excited about the music, because it was through him I first heard Chick Corea, or first heard Return to Forever. And back then that was the big boombox day. So he had a boombox and he was standing outside it, and he said, "Listen to this, listen to what Stanley does right there." And then that just immediately made me start listening to the music even closer than I was already hearing it. you know.
Well, now aside from the music that you were turned on to, just for yourself as a general musician, did you make a conscious switch from drums to vibraphone and kind of leave the drums behind, or did you kind of keep that going too?
Well, I wouldn't say I kept it going. You know, first of all, you know, you go into a school like that.
You're going to school with Kenny Washington and Omar Hakim.
Yeah, yeah, and it's over. You know what I mean? You know, guys that and there's guys that are in the shadow of them that were really good players as well. You know, so it just probably sort of helped me to even gravitate to the vibes even more.
So it's almost a natural evolution away from insane competition.
Yeah, and then not only that, but then I think there was that same my first year in M&A was 10th grade, because my junior high school still went up to 9th grade back then. So that same year, I went to a concert at my aunt's church. There's this one guy gave a solo piano concert, and his name was Galen Underwood. You know Lenny Underwood? You ever heard of him?
I remember that name. Was he the bass player in Boston?
He's a pianist, and
and
I think he's from the Bronx originally. He lives in Middleton now, but he was in that band Unlimited Touch with Tony Cintrone and Philip Hamilton, guitarist. They had a couple hits, Searching to Find the One and stuff like that. Dun, 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 dun. Gotta keep on.
So what happened at this solo piano concert?
He was incredible. You know, he played not only Maple Leaf Rag, but, you know, his classical repertoire. So like that even convinced me also that I didn't really want to pursue the piano, you know, like the pianist there. And you know, the pianists at the school were like, I don't know if you heard of Fred McFarlane, but him and Arturo Alfaro were really good friends. Arturo came in, he was younger than me. He came in after me. I think Arturo might have actually gotten kicked out because from Hookie or whatever, but he was already, you know, he was brilliant. We used to jam like the Chick Corea, Gary Burton stuff together, you know,
and what? So was that one of your first influences of great vibists or vibraphonists? Hearing Gary with Chick?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the first. You know, I can't say who I heard first, whether it was Baggs or Lionel Hampton. I just know that all around that time, it's like you said, man, all of these things came together, and then I, rummaging through my parents' attic, I found this book called Pictorial History of Jazz, and it was mostly pictures, but it would have little information underneath. But the amazing thing about it was that it was pictures, and it chronicled from like Ma Rainey and Jelly Roll Morton and you know, King Oliver into, I think the most recent thing, the last picture in the book was Chet Baker. Like that was modern, you know, that was the modern jet, you know, that was sort of the, you know, which way is the music going.
This was an old book.
This is an old book, but yeah. I was like, and anytime I saw a picture of people playing the instrument, it was just like, you know, it was triggering something in me, you know, like.
Well, how old would you say you were, Brian, when you were really a vibraphonist and you had left everything else behind? 15 or 16, something like that?
Well, you know, I was in a percussion department, so I was still studying percussion. As a matter of fact, JD, he was the first one to step to me and say, you know, if you take this seriously, you might be able to make a living at it, you know. And like
so he encouraged you to branch out with timpani and other classical percussion.
Well, yeah, I was in the percussion department, so you would, but you know, the difference was like when he mentioned it to me, then like on Parent Teacher Day, he mentioned to my mom that he could swing a little bit of a scholarship for me at Manhattan School of Music to the prep division. You know, because he was teaching there, he was on staff there. So, I used to see Artie, Arturo O'Farrell, and this guy Fred McFarlane were friends, and they could both play bass, which I didn't even know. I saw them give like a duo concert and they were switching off, taking turns playing piano and bass, both of them.
Yeah.
I was like, damn, man, wow. So, so that's when, so that was the 11th grade. Like, he had me audition for the All City Band, and he was in charge of the percussion section, organizing the guys, and he got me studying with him at Manhattan School of Music. So like that was my whole Saturday. So immediately shift, and the thing was, I grew up like loving basketball, loving playing basketball. So I was still trying to be playing, but like that year, the junior year in high school is when I really and I was around these people that took it seriously, and all different, the different styles of, jazz, classical, rock, just that intensity where this is the thing that y'all talk about, this is, guys having an argument like who's better, Verdine White or Larry Graham, and
right, okay.
The impromptu, Al McDowell was there too, who was, I think he
played with Prime Time with Ornette later.
Yeah, matter of fact, I think Ornette came up, there was a story that he came up to the school looking for a bass player, and Al was standing outside, like.
Well, interestingly, didn't Chris Walker, who played with him also on electric bass, wasn't Chris also at one of those schools in New York?
It's possible, but is that a later?
That would be a later edition of. Well, I went to see Prime Time at the Berkeley Performance Center in Boston, and it was when Ornette had kind of like an octet, like two of everything, 2 guitars, 2 bass players, 2 drummers, and I remember.
Oh, that was when Jamaluddin was also playing.
I'm trying to remember. No. It must have been later. I'm just a little younger. I loved that band with Jamaluddin, but I only heard about them after that had already been recorded and happened. Mm-hmm. The band that I saw, I know DiNardo, his son, was playing drums. Maybe Badal Roy was on tabla. That was the other percussionist.
Okay.
I know that the guitar players, when I saw it, it was no longer Bern Nix and Charlie Ellerby. It was on to Kenny Wessel and Chris Rosenberg. Yeah, and one of the bass players was Chris Walker. I didn't know who he was, young brother. And I said, wow, this guy's incredible. Somebody in the audience yelled out, "Hey, Ornette, what's the other bass player's name?" Because apparently Ornette announced everybody but Al McDowell. And so Ornette goes to a full house of people who've come to hear Ornette Coleman. He says, "Al, his name is Al." And that's all we got. But I don't even know. I don't think he said Al McDowell, because you can imagine in speech, in addition to music, Ornette had his own way of communicating. Kenny Wessel told me one day, Ornette said to him, "Kenny, you got to find your unison." And then he couldn't sleep for 3 nights. So anyway, you went through all of this. And so did you attend Manhattan School of Music, like regular undergrad?
No, I was just in that prep division. I think I auditioned, but I don't know if I had a problem with the theory tests. Manhattan and Juilliard, the competition is intense. So there's like a cutoff. They only have a certain amount of vacancies. It's like trying to get into a private school on a scholarship.
Right.
So I ended up I started out at Brooklyn, and
We're Brooklyn Conservatory or
Brooklyn College.
Brooklyn College. Okay.
Yeah. The head of the percussion department there was Arnie Lang. We called him Arnie. His name's Morris Lang, who was a member of the Philharmonic. He was in the Philharmonic percussion section.
Didn't he write like some famous percussion books that everybody practiced out of?
Probably. Yeah, I know he's got a timpani book. He's put out some stuff. He had his hand in a lot of different things, and he was a great percussionist, and he gave me a lot of great advice, and a lot of, that's the thing, a lot of what I learned from these teachers is stuff that I'm almost regurgitating, not necessarily verbatim, but conceptually. One of the things he taught me was having a I call it a sound vision, like an idea for what you want your sound to be like. So like he said, what do you want your roll to sound like? I mean, I'd never been asked that before. A roll on a snare drum.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, so I'm like,
Your
well,
ROLL, not your ROLE.
right. So yeah, so he says, sing it what you want your role to sound like. Never been asked that before either. Never been asked to sing something that I wanted to play. So I said, I don't know. He said, that's how you want your role to sound. I want my role to sound like, bah! And you know, that's one of those things like, okay, you know,
Like an aha moment.
yeah, because you know, and JD used to say this. He said, you know, in my day, they used to say we got 17 musicians and a drummer. You know, like his whole thing was about a drummer, and he was one of the best conductors. A matter of fact, I got him on a record date. One of the first times I was in the studio professionally, and this music was like involved and intense, you know. And it was just like it was not a large group, but you know, it needed somebody to ground the timing of it so you could execute the music properly. And I suggested him, and he ended up doing it, you know, and he was great, you know.
Sure. Well, now let me ask you a question, Bryan. How do you get from where you are now with all of these studies, basically classical studies and vibraphone, along with other mallets, timpani, snare drum, and all the traditional stuff? How do you get to the point where you're starting to become an improvising vibraphonist and knowing jazz, knowing tunes, and being able to blow? And also, for the vibraphonists out there, whoever happens to watch this, how did you become kind of a four mallet vibist? And can you tell us, with the famous cats, is everybody like that, or do some guys just tend to play two and play solo without comping for themselves? And how does that all play out?
Let me. Well, that's a loaded. That's about 4 things to address. The first person that I saw holding 4 sticks was that Danny Druckmann. I don't know if I ever told him that I ever saw in person doing that.
Yes.
And at that point, I was still just, you know, watching and observing and just interested in. But when I saw that, you know, I was like, oh wow, you can actually, you know, it's more than just playing 2 notes. You can play 3 and 4 notes at a time and make. And you know, since you as a pianist, you're already visually acquainted with the keyboard pattern. You know, it's not like you have to look to know where notes are. You know, you know where they are. So I think for some people find the challenge of I guess the spacing of the notes or whatever, because that is very different than having everything under your finger. That's one thing, is that it's one of the most disconnected, you know, things where you're not actually touching it with your personal skin and fingers and stuff like that. You're touching you through sticks and all of that. And
tell us the four mallet technique that you use. I'm assuming that pretty quickly you must have gotten hip to these 4 people: Lionel Hampton, Gary Burton, Milt Jackson, and Bobby Hutcherson. Do they all do that also, or do they have their own way of doing it?
I'm sure I never saw Bags do it, but when I, you know,
and that's Milt Jackson for those not in the know. Okay.
Yeah. You know, I wasn't even sure, you know, for a while. So I got into I'm seeing these guys and then Mark Sherman went to Music and Art also. He was in the same, I think in the same class as Danny Druckmann, which was a couple years old. They were already seniors when I got into the school. So I used to see Mark actually he was just getting into the, you know, blowing on the vibes, and he had learned Donna Lee, you know, and I saw him playing it on a xylophone or something like that. And immediately I got a transcription. I don't know, it was from a friend of mine, and I started learning. And at some point in the, I just became obsessed, and that's what I guess the Chocho must have encouraged my mom to consider trying to get me an instrument.
Okay. But excuse me, obsessed with the vibes or obsessed with playing jazz or both?
With the vibes. Well, I think it came, but the vibes, initially, I think it was but you know, I was already, I was already interested in improvisation, like, because we used to get solos in that little dance band in junior high school. And my solo started out on the melodica. That was, you know, I remember transcribing, not really that I wrote it out, but I learned a solo from Diodato for that Space Odyssey 2001 thing, a smooth jazz thing he had. Yeah, exactly. So I was already, and then our little core of friends would enter the talent show and play whatever, you know, like we played Chameleon one year. And, you know, I had learned some of Herbie's synth solo on the melodica, you know, like that kind of thing. So I was like already interested in something beyond, but you know, those things played back then, those things played on R&B radio, 2001, Chameleon. And so then, you know, just being around the cats and my aunt sent me a subscription to Downbeat. Yeah, and Larry Coryell was on the cover of the one that she ordered the subscription from, and she sent me the copy of that. And you know, it flips me out because I had my different times when I got to play with Larry in different.
You know, I had a very weird parallel experience. The first issue of Downbeat I ever got had John Abercrombie on the cover. And many years later, he became one of my best friends. And over the last 11 or 12 years of his life, I was with him all the time. And it didn't even kind of click with me. Oh, he was on the cover of my first Downbeat the way that Larry was.
Yeah, that's wild. That's just crazy because like when you think of yourself back then, you're looking at these people like, you know, the same way a kid looks at, you know, sports stars or something, you know, like
right. No, it'd be like looking at Shaquille or George Clooney or someone who used to be kind of out of reach in whatever way.
Yeah, exactly. And you're looking at names in you know, like the whole Downbeat polls and all of that crap, you know, and to find yourself in it years later, like you just don't say to yourself in that moment, oh, I'm gonna see my name in there, I'm gonna be on. I didn't think like that when I was just.
But obviously, it was a natural progression. And you know what? If you don't mind, for time constraints, I'm going to fast forward you into your kind of professional jazz career, and because there's so many.
Well, I do want to say one thing because we have this. I never played in the McDonald's band, right? But JD, for some reason, he organized a alumni version of the band for a Christmas party that Lionel Hampton used to give at the Gladys Hampton houses. These are like apartment buildings named after his wife. He used to give a Christmas party for the kids, and he comes dressed up as Santa Claus. And
Lionel Hampton was Santa?
He was Santa. Yeah, Lionel Hampton as Santa. And the reason JD called me, he said, I know you were never in the band, but he said Hamp usually has his vibes there, and I don't really have a pianist to call. So, you know, and then as it turned out, Hamp wasn't going to have his vibes there. So I didn't even have a car at the time. My aunt had to take me to the thing. Chris Rogers was in the band though. I'm surprised you weren't there. I think Francis Skeeny.
You know why? Because Francis Skeeny and Chris Rogers, you know, I'm friends with Chris Rogers, but y'all are a little older than me. And the way I know this is when I was in the McDonald's band, sometimes they would bring Chris back from college to sub or to do an important gig. And when I was 14 years old and I was just playing second tenor in the McDonald's Tri-State band, I missed a gig. And I came back and I said to my buddy, Brian Cohen, who played baritone next to me, so, hey, man, you know, who subbed for me when I was out? He goes, Bob Franceschini. I was like, ah! Because Bob Franceschini was a monster adult known New York tenor player, and I was still a 14-year-old kid. So there was occasionally a ringer in that band. But now what happened with you and JD and Lionel Hampton at that party?
So, you know, I'm playing and at one point we're playing Good Bait. And all of a sudden, I mean, the party was wild. You know, there was a woman there, much younger woman. She was Ham's assistant. I don't know what she was to him, but kids, if you want a gift, you have to get in line. It was like, wow, but we were just playing out there. So then at some point they're playing Good Bait and he comes over and he's in there in a Santa Claus suit. So I step away from the instrument. He immediately picks up the four mallets. Well, I know now afterwards that I heard recordings where he was clearly playing comping chords and stuff like that.
Okay.
You know, so he immediately starts comping. You know, then he puts the two mallets down. He starts blowing, and he's playing. He's making the changes. He's playing da ba da ba da ba da ba da. You know, like but he suddenly stops and puts his face almost touched the music, and then he says, "Say, Gaze, what's that chord change right there?" And so literally, I'm standing there going, A minor 7, D 7. He's like, I had to call out every chord change, and he just and like I looked over at my aunt who had taken me to the gig, and she's beaming, like she's cracking up, you know, like it's hilarious. And you know, later, JD said, "Hey, what do you think of the vibes playing?" Oh, he's good, you know, whatever. But from that moment, I took that, you know, all of these guys can probably play with four mallets. It's just a matter of choice. You know, it's just like a choice of direction, and like anything else that you choose to do, you know. So like, I don't doubt that even you know, Stefan used to play four mallets sometimes at the beginning, and he used to ask, "Man, how do you comp like that? That sounds like a piano player." But you know, he made a decision that there's a certain approach that he's coming from, but all of these guys could play four if they wanted to, you know.
I see.
And,
okay, so but is that a thing? It's a sneaky thing. Like if you're watching any great drummer like Buddy Rich or Billy Hart, or even just a good drummer, when they switch from sticks to brushes, we in the audience usually don't notice because they got a slick way of doing it that they have to develop just professionally and musically. So do vibes players, do they comp with four mallets, and when it's time to solo, sneakily put two of them down like in the stick bag and then jump to two?
Right. Well, you know, I don't think you would generally see me doing that. The only time I put them down was when I was with the Lounge Lizards, and you know, 9 people in the band, and you got electric instruments and Calvin Weston and Billy Martin on percussion. So like, I didn't have an amplified instrument, so I'm always using external mics. So sometimes I was putting it down just to be able to power through, and just for I don't know.
You would say when volume is a problem, you would switch to 2 to be heard. Is that right?
Sometimes in that situation, yeah. And that would be the only, and then unless I was doing some kind of tribute, like I've done a tribute to Bags, and you know, I use mallets with the big heads, and you know, and a tribute to Roy Ayers, you know, but I want to know, I don't know if they sneakily do it, but you know, I know Steve Nelson puts his 2 down to blow. Bobby used to do that, and Maneri does that sometimes, you know, you know, and yeah, so those are the main guys that actually play for and do it a lot.
And really quickly, what did Milt do and what did Gary do?
Well, Gary was a piano player first, and so his approach was very pianistic, and that happened. You know, I was doing my jury, a performance test in college at Brooklyn, and the adjudicators were Morris Lang, the percussion, and a guy named, I think his name was Joel Sachs. He was a pianist, piano department. And immediately after I played a piece from a David Friedman book, who was he's another great vibraphonist. Him and Dave Samuels were very close. Dave Samuels became my teacher later.
Didn't they have about 2 vibes band together? Was it called Double Image?
Yeah. So it was Vibes and Marimba. Vibes and Marimba. It started out with just the 2 of them, but then they added a rhythm section. Harvey Schwartz played bass, and I think originally was Danny Gottlieb or a guy named Mike Pasqua or something like that. I can't remember. I think Gottlieb was in that group though, and Harvey, and so yeah, all of that stuff got me excited. You know, and I guess being around Omar, Kenny Washington, all them cats, you know, watching Marcus Miller develop his plan, it was surreal. You know, But
let's put it this way: you were in a very high-end, exciting incubator.
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Well, that's all amazing, Brian. So let's jump ahead, man. I'm going to read a little list of some of the cats that you played with professionally. We're going to hear you with some of them, but you've recorded or performed. Let me see. I forgot the other side of this napkin has some more. Man, you've been a soloist with the WDR band in Germany under the baton of Gunther Schuller. You've worked with percussionist Steve Kroon. You played with great trumpet player and flugelhorn player Tom Harrell.
Yeah.
We know that you have done a lot of playing on The Lion King on Broadway. I'd like to talk about that a little later if we could. Dave Douglas, Greg Osby, Henry Threadgill. But one of the people that you seem to have worked with the most and the longest is Fathead, David Fathead Newman. Tremendous alto and tenor player, really equally wonderful on both, right?
Yeah.
And best known to folks, maybe the song Hard Times, and from his recordings with Ray Charles, Fathead and Hank Crawford, I guess, were in that section together. But you became a member of Fathead's small group. And, when I would see you, when you and I would have something to do together, hey, man, what you been doing? Oh, man, I did, something with Fathead. And I remember thinking, Fathead Newman using vibes. That's interesting. And from the little information I could gather, you made at least 4 CDs with Fathead, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So why don't we hear you with him and then talk about it? What do you think?
Sure.
Okay, so this is David Fathead Newman on saxophone. I forget which one. With Bryan Carrott on vibes. This is called Cellar Groove.
Cellar Groove. Yeah, this is a song he recorded, I think, probably in the 60s when he first, maybe, I don't know if it was while he was with Ray or after. And it's really a trip having somebody like Kenny on the date, because he immediately recalls everything about that. He had a credible record, grew up with a record collection in his house, like
right.
Hundreds
No, I know Kenny's like the king of records.
Yeah, and then Fathead had me transcribe and arrange a lot of music for that date. I remember.
Okay, well let me just check in with our producer. Are we ready to play the Fathead Newman track? Okay, here we go. right. David Fathead Newman, Cellar Blues, Fathead on tenor saxophone, Cedar Walton on piano, David Williams on acoustic bass, Kenny Washington, your old schoolmate on drums, and Bryan Carrott on vibes. That is a swinging ass band, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's funny because that represents the first recording after attending high school with Kenny. The first recording that I played with him on, I guess the only one, and that was Ugobs years later, like, over 20 years, I think.
Sure.
From high school.
Well, what can you tell us about Fathead as a musician, as a band leader, and as an important person in your professional life?
Well, I used to joke when I would go finish a solo and we were standing on the side together. He would say stuff like, yeah, Bryan, you sounding good there, man. And I said, man, I got to play 70 notes just to match what, I got to play 10 times as many notes just trying to hang with you, because what I got from him was that it was just all real, I ran into Greg Bandy one time and he said, man, I miss that cat. He was a real, it was just, but playing alongside him is when I really got to hear how much he really appreciates, he's got a reputation for being the soulful player. He came into prominence with Ray Charles, but he's
got these jazz chops also, like real.
Yeah, he loved, you could tell by the way he played. He loved playing bebop. He loved playing things that were beyond that. And he had a thing with the ballads, man, and the tone and the eeriness and the Ben Webster sound and, there was some things that probably he wasn't always, that's probably why a couple of those recordings he had me, and the first recording I did with him was called Under a Woodstock Moon, which is sort of like a tribute to nature. It was not long after he had moved to Woodstock. There became a vacancy of homes up there when the IBM company moved away, and he got a good deal because he used to live right down in the heart of the village on Christopher Street, and him and Sue, Karen, his wife, moved to Woodstock, and that, I think he connected with some stuff that probably he grew up with, but it had been a long time after being such a city cat and high profile for so long, and he would actually go back to like chopping, firewood and stuff like that. He's really connected with nature. So he did this record called Under a Woodstock Moon that was like a dedication to nature. And then the songs had, themes like that. And Dave Lenhart, who used to play piano with him a lot, he arranged that date. And then he started using we started recording for High Note, and he started getting different people to play. So this, I think, was the second record on High Note that we did. And so that's why he had me, some things he wasn't necessarily 100% as far as transcribing or, articulating melodies, sometimes counting off tunes. He would just either bop his head, which is acceptable to me, if it's a conventional thing, or sometimes he would just start playing the head, like or playing an ostinato. Like if he wanted to do Night in Tunisia, he played a bass line at this breakneck tempo, and it was always a trip for me to see how each drummer anticipated how how they were going to deal with it. Kenny Washington, like we'd be playing Sweet Basil for a week or whatever, Kenny would just immediately play a different tempo. Right? It's like, I'm not going crazy with this dude. Like, Bernard Harper would play like a funk, like a cross-stick funk. He said, and then, when you get into the blow, and he would but like, and every person, some people just tried to play, like whatever like some complicated beat, to match that tempo. But that was always funny to check
But you
out.
know what, Brian? To me, that's creative music. That's jazz.
Yeah,
In other words, every heavy drummer who played with Fathead had a different response to this urgent problem.
Right.
You know, how do I deal with the beginning of Night in Tunisia at that tempo? And so I think that's fascinating. Each of these cats had their own approach, and I'm sure for you being in the band consistently with all of them, it made the song different depending on who's playing drums, for sure.
Right. You know, we once did a week with Ben Riley playing. I think it was at the Iridium, and that was, I can't even, you know.
Ben Riley was so swinging and so musical, and I did get
the first thing at the top of my brain, man. You know, it was just like Billy Higgins, like that was that's just like the elite of swinging ass. You know, the groove is just so ridiculous.
Sure.
So,
well, speaking of great drummers, man, let's move on to another cat. You were in a very interesting creative band.
Before we do,
yes,
I just want to I know there's things that happen that nobody knows about. One time, Fathead and I, from doing gigs, sometimes we did gigs without piano where I was the comping instrument, and I think it opened up his mind a little bit. And one time he had me come up and do a duo concert with him. There was some spot up there in Woodstock that was doing these, you know, concerts. Maybe Jack DeJohnette would do like a duo or a solo concert, that kind of thing. And we actually did a duo concert. And, you know, I just remember sweating. And he played tenor, alto, and soprano, and flute. Like, and I just rehearsed. I went to his house and rehearsed that day. And we did some of the material that we had recorded, and I had to figure out how I was gonna.
You had to cover everything.
Yeah. But it was intense. But it was. I just like it. Just made me appreciate. And one of the things is the first time I played in the Vision Festival. You ever heard of that festival?
Sure. That's like in downtown.
Yeah, it's downtown. It's a lot of experimental music, stuff like that. You know, I think William Parker is kind of in charge of it. And the first time I played for it, it was just like in some church basement. And Karen, when she called me, David's wife said she says it's kind of like an avant-garde festival, but they want David to play. You know, it's just like everybody had love for him. You know what I mean? And we were playing stuff like Take the Cold Train and stuff. But I just remember there was one tune where we kind of got out there. Melissa Slocum was playing bass. Yeah. She started playing like violin tones on the thing, and I was doing something crazy, and Bernard would grab his cymbal and so Fathead turns to me, he said, well, Carrott, I guess we are an avant-garde band tonight. You know, and he had like funny moments like that. Like we were at Blues Alley at the time, and we stand at the bar, and somebody says, "Wow, you guys, you play all these tunes, and you don't have music. How do you remember all these tunes and all the changes?" And Fathead says, "Well, I've been taking this stuff from my memory, but I can't remember the name of the stuff I'm taking."
Like Ginkgo biloba or something.
It was that, but he couldn't remember the name of it, you know. Right. So like he used to be funny sometimes without being funny. And then sometimes he was intentionally funny, like when he was around those cats of his generation, you know, like we were playing in Berlin, this festival after we were in the dressing room, and he walked in when Dr. Lonnie was a special guest. He said,
Lonnie Smith, the Turbinator.
Yeah, he says, I was having some problem breathing on stage, and then Fathead immediately said, "That's because he got all them boogers in your nose." You know, like sometimes he was just quick and just came out of left field with something, you know, especially like them cats, you know, like that he goes back with, you know, like.
So Fathead was an improviser with comedy and with the saxophone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, and I'm sure a beautiful experience. Well, I want to get to a bunch of other great people. Let's talk about Ralph Peterson. For me, one of the most volcanic, exciting, killing drummers of the last 30 years, along with Marvin Smitty Smith and Tane and Cindy and different people. But Ralph Peterson had an interesting band called the Fotet. I remember when you were working with them, and he, at least at the beginning, the horn in the group was Don Byron on clarinet, and then you on vibes, and then I guess Melissa or other bass players and drums. That's kind of an unusual band, clarinet, vibes in a quartet, right? And I obviously Ralph conceived of it that way when he put it together with you guys, right?
Well, yeah, it was from, you know, I think, I don't think he sat and conceived it. I think it was experiencing these different people. I think Don and Ralph were in Craig Harris's, the trombonist, Tailgater's Tales together. I think it was a band, maybe Brandon Ross was in that band too. And that's where he got exposed to Don Byron and realized that this guy is playing the clarinet coming from another way.
A whole other place.
And it was a simpatico, like Don said, I always wanted to be, you know, and Don also went to music and art, but at the time he was totally not into jazz. He was just a classical player. I didn't even know him.
So, I was going to say you knew him first, because when I was a freshman at New England Conservatory, there was Don. He was a senior, and he was playing some baritone saxophone and a lot more clarinet, you know. And then, of course, he became a famous cat and also basically a stylist on the clarinet. He doesn't play. Nobody else plays like Don Byron.
Yeah. And
you know? Well, so the question is, the song we're about to hear. This is Ralph Peterson Fotet. And this is called Apple's Eye. So will this have Don on clarinet, or will it have Ralph Bowen on soprano saxophone? This is not the band with Don, you know. It says right here, Ralph Bowen on soprano says.
It's Ralph. Yeah. It was different configuration. After Don, you know, branched out with his own projects.
Steve Wilson at some point?
Steve Wilson for a few recordings, or at least two.
Well, let's hear the band with you and Ralph. So Ralph Peterson Fotet, Ralph Bowen on soprano saxophone, Bryan Carrott on vibes. I believe, Herschel, you can type for me Melissa Slocum on bass.
No, this is Belden Bullock.
Belden Bullock on bass. Okay.
Belden was, yeah.
Okay, well let's hear it, and let's talk about playing with Ralph. So Ralph Peterson Fotet with Bryan Carrott, Apple's Eye.
That's funny. I just realized I picked a song where Ralph is playing brushes.
Yeah, and I had actually picked one earlier in the week that I wish we had played, but we will another time. It's kind of more of a spanking faster thing with Don Byron on clarinet, which might be a little more indicative of some of the spirit of that band with Ralph.
Yeah, I almost picked Johnny Come Lately, which was from the first recording that we did.
The Strayhorn Duke Ellington song?
Yeah, it's a straight horn, but Ralph had a way of doing it where he took these 7-beat breaks or something like that. We had this break. One time it was almost two measures, and then the next time, where it goes ba da ba ba, and he would stop there. Ba da, and
I mean, Ralph is nothing if not exciting. I mean, you can't really describe Ralph Peterson without that element coming in.
Yeah.
And he was a member of that kind of all-star band of what were called the Young Lions at the time, Out of the Blue, with Renee Rosnes and Ralph Bowen and Billy Drummond was in it, I believe, at another point, and Steve Wilson and Harry Pickens. But anyway, Ralph was also a guy who, toward the end of Art Blakey's life and career, Ralph would play on the Art Blakey gigs, wouldn't he? As sort of like sort of like a second in command / give me a break, a sub. I want to feature him. But I mean, to me, he's an anointed one, because Art Blakey basically said, this is a drummer I respect enough to have play with my band, with the Jazz Messengers. And Ralph did that. And that was one of the ways that everybody became aware of just how heavy and great he is.
They had a lot of, actually, Ralph has that as his distinction, as that he did that with Blakey and with Elvin, as Elvin had some health challenges in his later years.
Well, did Elvin kind of have Ralph sitting by the side and play on some of his gigs?
And he had Ralph take over second set, stuff like that at the Blue Note.
No kidding.
I don't know if that was the last time that Elvin was appearing there, but yeah. So I don't know if there's anybody else in the scene at all that has that distinction, But
I believe that Blakey. I mean, these guys, they're our friends and colleagues. They could correct me, but I believe Blakey also kind of shepherded and featured Jeff Tain Watson, Cindy Blackman at some point also.
Yeah, probably. I mean, he knew he knew it, and Cindy was close with him too, and. But I heard a story that somebody, I don't remember who it was, but when Blakey finished playing and he came off the stage and Ralph was standing there and he put the sticks in his hand as if he was passing the torch or something. But, when we were younger, I was actually, there's so many multi-connections, because I had a girlfriend that went to Berkeley, and I became close. We introduced Branford and a friend of ours from my area in school and the music and art, introduced them to each other. They got married eventually, Tessie, and so I was pretty close with Branford back then, and
no,
I met Ralph.
Didn't you do a film score with Branford? You did a film called
Oh yeah, much later. Yeah, that was funny because Ralph, his dad was the mayor down in Pleasantville, New Jersey. It's a town near Atlantic City, and he was going to have a re-election. We did a benefit concert, and he had Branford as a special guest. And Branford walks into the rehearsal. We're rehearsing the day of the gig on stage, and he says, "Oh shoot, man! I didn't even know you were in this band." Ralph just said, I want you to do this gig for my pop, and he drove down from wherever, New Rochelle at the time, and so he said, "Man, I got a project for you. I want you to play on." It was I guess this was around 2002 or something like that. I don't remember the exact dates. 2000, because I remember I was engaged. So yeah. And he said it was one of them 40 Acres and a Mule, which is actually Spice production company. He wasn't directing the movie, but it was his production.
What did you do in the movie? Did you play in the movie or on the score?
No, just the soundtrack. the recording, he said he says part of the vibe that he wanted, pun intended, was like a modern jazz quartet thing. But then there was some stuff that I played with his quartet. It was his quartet at the time, which was Joey
Calderazzo and Tane.
But Scott Colley, I think, was the bass player on that.
Okay.
And, so some stuff I was just me playing with that rhythm section, and then some of it was all of us playing together. Some of it was just him and the quartet. And yeah, so but Ralph and I actually, it seems like we met in these scenes with back then with Branford and I think Walter Davis had a gig where he had Branford and Winton and Ralph and Phil Bowler.
Wow.
And then Ralph was at Rutgers. We used to kind of network. Ralph was at Rutgers. I had taken a break from Brooklyn. After my second year, I kind of messed up a little bit. I worked for a while, got the flavor of that, doing 9-to-5 jobs. And I took some private lessons with Dave Samuels. I went back to school at William Patterson where he was teaching. So we were kind of, the Jersey school kids, Ralph was at Rutgers and I was at, I think Frank Lacey also was at Rutgers. And then eventually Barry Danielian became a roommate of mine and he had gone to Berkeley, when Branford.
Great trumpet player. I forgot about Barry.
Yeah. And he really, matter of fact, him and Frank had been in this incredible band up there, which was like an Earth, Wind and Fire. Like they were all great players. And then there were people that sang. Frank was one of the singers, And so Barry, we started collaborating on concerts and would pull Frank in on stuff. And they played in my senior recital. We had like a joint senior recital, and these guys. And then Ralph and I ended up on some gig, a bass player, Brian Smith. And that was when Ralph started telling me he had this idea for a band, and he was, he was back there popping and I was comping, and he's like, "Oh yeah, Carrott, man, we're gonna get in the studio, blah blah blah." And so he did a couple of records with Quintet on Blue Note after Out of the Blue, and then I think he did a trio record, Triangular, with Jerry Allen and Essie, and then he started experimenting with this idea with Don Byron and myself, and originally we rehearsed in Don's, and I had played with Don also though. Don called me for a gig. I don't even remember how that happened.
See, man, this is like a family tree. I need a giant piece of paper and a big black Sharpie, a big marker to make all these connections. And
yeah, I played with this girl that used to be involved with John Lurie, a girl named Kazu. She was a Japanese girl, and she had Don Byron on the gig, and I was on, and I think I was taking Mark Rebo's place because there was no comping. He was out on the road with Elvis Costello.
Okay, well, man, let me put a little wedge in here because there's so much to talk about, and I can already tell we're going to have to do a volume 2 in the ensuing months, Brian, to get to everything.
I don't know if anybody wants to hear all of this stuff, man.
Well, but I got 4 more subjects that I'm going to want to concisely hit because I would like to include them in your CV here. The first thing is you just mentioned the Lounge Lizards, a particularly favorite band of mine. And the kind of cliche was that they were part of this so-called like 1980s downtown scene. And they were originally known as kind of guys who wore like skinny suits and ties and played almost like a fake jazz or an avant-garde jazz with his brother Evan Lurie on piano and other original people like our friend Tony Garnier and Arto Lindsay and who was the drummer? Was it Anton Fear or different people? But anyway, the version of the Lounge Lizards that we're about to hear you in was very interesting to me because it went from being all these older cats that I thought of as adults to like all my friends who were in the Lounge Lizards at the same time. Billy Martin on percussion, with whom I later played in his band called Illy B. That didn't really get a recording that people could be hip to. And then, of course, Medeski, Martin, and Wood. And Ben Porowski was there on drums probably after G. Calvin Weston, who's one of the most amazing drummers I've ever heard. And we actually did a gig at the new Knitting Factory on Leonard Street. Medeski, Martin, and Wood and the guests were me on tenor, Mark Rebo on guitar, and Calvin on drums, and we played Coltrane's Africa. And you know how like Medeski, Martin, and Wood fans are like the Grateful Dead. They just get stupid with like, bootlegs and passing concerts around. So somewhere that concert exists. That's the one time I played with Calvin. He knocked me out. But other cats in that band, Michael Blake, the tenor player that you're about to see, is a guy that I knew growing up studying at Banff in Canada. And the only guy in the band I didn't know was Mickey Novazio. In fact, the bass player, Oren Blodow, we used to go to USTAN, which was an arts day camp on Long Island, 5 days a week in the summer. And I used to make Oren carry my tenor. Oren, decades later, thank you very much for carrying a lazy man's instrument. So let's hear the Lounge Lizards, led by the inimitable
John Lurie,
humorist, alto and soprano saxophonist, conceptualist, provocateur, host of the show Fishing with John, and a movie star, Strangers in Paradise and Down by Law, the first two movies that put Jim Jarmusch on the map. We're gonna have to talk about John Lurie, but suffice it to say, here come the Lounge Lizards, led by John Lurie on alto saxophone, with our man here, Bryan Carrott, on vibes. Let's check this out and see what this triggers in your memory. Uh-oh.
Are you muted? You got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Well, so there's a taste of the Lounge Lizards, the edition with you in it, and of course, all that classical training with Morris Lang and Justin DeChocho and everybody, it paid off, because there you are somewhere in Germany playing timpani with the Lounge Lizards. I have to assume that you didn't have timpani every night. It may have been something you used when it was available.
Had it every night.
You did. It was like it was in the rider. It was part of the gig and the orchestration and everything.
You know, there were times when you had some issues and they, you know, they had that kind of cloud that you had to go and find the right one. But yeah, this was the second tour, and it ended up being that was the tour that they made the movie off of. You know, the first tour was all Germany. In 1990, I think, and with the exception of the first gig, which was in Athens on a mountain somewhere, which is in itself, that's a story. But
all I remember is rehearsing with Billy in his loft in Dumbo before they called it Dumbo, under the Manhattan Bridge.
Yeah, and
I just remember Billy saying something like, you know, with the Lizards we went to Greece. That was in the back of my head.
Yeah, so yeah, that was our first gig out after the Knitting Factory. We did the Knitting Factory. We came on to play the Knitting Factory just to get our, you know, thing wet before we took it to, but we had been rehearsing, had a lockdown in the studio for like 2 weeks. You know, we've been rehearsing literally 8 hours a day.
I think the Lounge Lizards in general were a fantastic band, and I really love this edition of it with these exact players, or the version with Ben Porowski on drums and these exact players. And I guess my question is, you know, Lurie wasn't going the easy route. He could have just had a quintet or a quartet or something. But this version of the band, that's a whole lot to deal with. Jane on cello and you with other percussion. And how was the music put together? How was it rehearsed and realized?
Well, as I was sitting there watching that, you know, I'm remembering that, you know, I know that I made up my part, and they would usually, John would have something, you know, and sometimes he'd have more than one idea. There's a section in that song where he wanted us to, you know, Oren to, and he wanted me to do the same thing.
Somehow.
Yeah. He just thought I could just go
create a glissando on the vibraphone. Yeah, on the timpani anyway.
Well, you change notes by the pedals, you know. Yes. So, but it couldn't just be in one stroke. I have to roll, you know. So there's a part where we're doing that back and forth, you know, and it's like it's an open like rubato cello solo. And but anyway, yeah, I was just remembering that thing, and that was a thing, you know, like when people heard, just even when I was rehearsing, and Byron and people who have been in the downtown scene, you know, they took what they knew about, or they thought they knew about the band, and they were already dumping like pre-existing ideas in my head. You know, like yeah, man, you know, I heard like the band makes up the songs and then he gets the credit for them and blah blah blah. And it's kind of like, it's almost like being in a rock band or a band like that where you create your own parts sometimes.
So it's something
he has an idea that he wants you to do specific, and like that melody, you know, that was, you know, definitely. And
excuse me, but so there's an element of group improvisation, and I mean, I know looking at that roster of musicians, every single one of you is a creative individual, so I'm sure nobody dropped the ball. You give people like Calvin Weston and Oren and yourself and Jane and Stephen Bernstein the chance to go. Everybody's going to come up with something. Not much of a problem, right?
Right. And then some of it was material that, you know, that he had previously recorded that we adapted to that instrumentation, which was.
I see. Well, two quick Lounge Lizards questions before we move on to Moo Hall, if that's all right. So one question is, I feel like John Lurie has some of the funniest and weirdest tune titles in the history of anything remotely associated with jazz. Like one of your other employers, Henry Threadgill, whose titles never make any sense with the first time you hear them. You know, like what was the one with cookies in the title, or, you know?
Oh, I don't remember.
You know, or
my favorite. I know he had one before I was in the band. He did add an album called, when he had that Columbia contract, it was called Too Much Sugar for a Dime.
Right.
But
I
my
remember
favorite of when I was with him was this title called "Burnt Till Recognition."
no, that's Henry Threadgill, to be clear, right?
Yeah, Henry Threadgill. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and Lurie, to me, Henry's titles, there might be some humor in them, but usually when you find out what's going on, it makes some sense, but it sort of feels like he's parsing and breaking apart sentences. Lurie's titles, in terms of syntax, make more sense, but they're weirder. Like No Pain for Cakes, or My Trip to Ireland. And my personal favorite, I went to see the Lounge Lizards at the Brattle Theater in Cambridge. Cat's a little older than us. I remember it was John on alto with Roy Nathanson on tenor and Curtis Folks, who has done this interview series with us. That was wonderful. On trombone. And I think Eric Sanko on bass, who was so beautiful. I thought, who is that girl playing electric bass? Oh, that's Eric Sanko.
Especially when his hair was longer.
Yeah, and Dougie Bound on drums, who we see on Facebook every day. He's hilarious. And I believe Evan was still playing piano. And I think their sister, Liz Lurie, lived in Cambridge, and she came to the gig. But long story short, John says, the next tune is entitled, He's Insane with No Pants On, and He's in My Apartment. I remember just dying, man. And I think that was the name of the tune, but I have to tell you, that was in the, 80s, early 90s. And Brian, between you and me, I mean, when we play with Magnets with Kim, we're playing our original music, but mostly things that we know we're going to play. But when I'm on a gig and I literally can't think of what the next tune is going to be, for the last 25 years, I will just say that title, He's Insane with No Pants On, He's in My Apartment. And then I might turn to the piano and say, what are we going to do? Oh, let's play Stella, So
might have done that on some Magnets gigs. Think about
it. My first question is, what's up with John's hilarious and weird song titles?
Well, it was, I think that's just part of, to say what's up with it. I think it's an extension of his personality,
He's also a painter. He also has a very dry sense of humor. I mean, John is hilarious, and I don't think he almost ever smiles when he's saying anything funny.
Yeah, almost. Well, sometimes he does. In the movie, the concert movie, actually, what intrigues me about that performance that you just showed, that's Vienna. That was in Vienna, Germany, and it was for a TV show. And from what I understand, the TV show paid for the gig. But that concert was filmed, to me, better than the concert movie that we made in Berlin.
Now, what's the name of the concert movie for folks who might want to find it?
The Lounge Lizards Live in Berlin.
Okay.
And he tells one of his silly stories, but there's one point, I was just looking at it today, where he's about to play, and then like first he says to one of the cameramen, "You can't be there." The guy is like, and he says, "Is he bothering you?" I said, "No, he's cool." So then he's about to play, and he looks at the audience and he says, "Are we boring you?" They laugh, and then somebody says, "Are we boring you?" And he starts to
excuse me. Someone in the audience yells that.
Yeah, in Germany, bro. And then he says he steps to the mic, and then he steps back, and he has this like little grin on his face, and that's even funnier than if he said something, So like sometimes he had his little smiles, that first gig in Athens. He was arguing. I don't think the other guy was arguing, but he just talked really fast and he had a heavy accent. And John was getting on his case. He said, "I did all these interviews for you." He felt that the band was underpaid or something because they let more people in, blah, blah, blah. So this guy is going, and we're in the bus now going down this mountain. And the guy is talking, so John's walking away and he says, "Shut up." And the guy is still talking. He says, "I said, shut up." And John goes at the guy like this, like he's gonna, and immediately I just jump up and grab the back of like the scruff of his coat, because I just freaked. Like, I'm in this, first thing that came to my mind was Midnight Express, like ended up in a Turkish prison. Like, like it was my first gig, my first night in another country, like.
Really?
So,
this is the first night of the tour?
That was the first tour night. Yeah, not the first night, but the first gig.
Oh,
yeah.
So you mean you had traveled, you'd been on a plane, but it was the beginning.
You know how that is.
But gig-wise, it was the inception of the tour.
Yeah.
And you were just trying to avert a big disaster.
Right. Like, 8 dudes and a girl in jail, because plus I had already heard stories about, Calvin wrecking a hotel room somewhere when, the band, there was one band before us that they didn't get recorded, but they're in some videos. And Brandon Ross calls it the band that was destined to fail. He's him, Albert McDowell, Calvin. I think that was Calvin's first tour, and then Roy and Curtis was still in the band. Then E.J. Rodriguez playing percussion, and I don't know. No, yeah, Brandon took Mark Rebo's place. So yeah, and and that was a tour where Calvin wrecked his hotel room and something happened back home, and he got.
Well, that was probably the Keith Moon influence.
Oh man, right. And John tells me, all I know is I got a call from Evan in the middle of the night. I'm at the police station. You have to come here right away.
So you know what? For right now, let's put a pin right at that moment for the Lounge Lizards, because there's a lot more to hear. I know that.
Yeah.
Brian, I can already tell you, you're going to have to come back and do part 2 with me here on Convo Improvvo if you're willing.
Yeah, I'm willing, man. I don't know if anybody wants to listen to
No, I think that they will. So out of deference to our producer, he's got some sick little kids at home.
Yeah.
I just want to hit 3 more tiny subjects very quickly. The first one is we're going to hear something. I don't mean tiny, I mean compressed. We're going to hear something from monster pianist, composer, and conceptualist. He was one of my teachers in Canada. I loved him. Muhal Richard Abrams. And he was always playing pool when we had downtime. So we started calling him Pool Hall Abrams. So I forgot about that. But anyway, he's really one of the great musicians in jazz. I believe he was one of the people who started the AACM in Chicago. He may have even been the person who started it.
They consider him the father of it.
Yeah, well, let's hear a song that you chose, Brian. This is Muhal Richard Abrams on piano, definitely Marty Ehrlich on saxophone, and Bryan Carrott on vibes. And
so this is Aaron Stewart on tenor.
Oh, okay, maybe it was the tune that I was listening to earlier. Let's hear it first. This is called Marching with Honor, Muhal Richard Abrams. was Muhal Richard Abrams, pianist and composer. Marching with Honor, which is already an interesting tune title, with Bryan playing vibes, and we believe Aaron Stewart on tenor. So tell us about Muhal a little bit, Bryan.
Wow. I mean, I don't know.
Oh, excuse me. While you're doing that, it says that was Brad Jones on bass, Reggie Nicholson on drums, whose name I already typed this morning, which never happens. This is piano, synthesizer, Muhal, tenor, Aaron Stewart, Eddie Allen, EJ Allen on trumpet.
Yeah.
On some cuts, Craig Harris on trombone, you on vibes and percussion, and on voice, looks like Ricarda Abrams.
Yeah.
Or Risharda.
I think it's Risharda.
Yeah. So Muhal is really not like any other jazz musician. I mean, he swings, he plays the blues, but he's like Herbie Nichols or somebody, or Monk. He really has his own whole world of musical language, would you say?
Yeah, which I think his main, if I had to narrow it down, which is, it's almost blasphemous for me to do that. If I had to narrow it down, one of the main words would be exploration.
Mm-hmm.
Because where we're at now, this recording was somewhere in the mid to late 90s. I first played with him in 91. After the last tour I did with Muhal, I played in a big band. And I may have been taking Warren Smith's place, I'm not really sure. But it was a big band, with amazing people in it. But at the Berlin Festival, and that was 91. So this was in maybe late 90s. And, it's probably in the first project I did with Muhal, Marty was on. And we actually recorded at Electric Lady Studios, but I think the size of the group and the instrumentation was almost too overwhelming for that particular spot. There was a harpist, Marty, Brandon Ross, Tony Cedrus, the accordion player that played with Paul Simon and them, and he also played with Henry. So it was, but anyway, yeah, so there was a lot, when I first played with him, that was a big band, there was a lot of written music, a lot of parts, and, but where I was playing with him more recently, and one of the main things was this quintet with the trumpet player, Jonathan Finlayson.
Oh, who used to be, was he in Steve Coleman and Five Elements?
Yeah, brilliant, beautiful sound and just, ideas,
I'm not really hip to his playing, but I've heard his name for a long time. I'd like to check him out.
Yeah, he's a great player. And that one, and then Brad and Reggie. And, so it got to where, for that group, he was writing lines, like different lines on a page. It'd be like 14 lines. And then he'd say, I want you to play this line, I want you to play that. And you play it at your own pace, and then there would be these different collaborations of things. And then he said, I want this to be, so I used to have to take notes, like what he wanted to happen when. And
so he was sculpting the band and the music in a non-traditional small jazz group way.
Yeah, and even, the last things I think I did with him, probably the last thing was a concert up at Wesleyan University. And we had done a concert.
In Connecticut?
Yeah. And we had done a concert. There's a lot of footage of a concert we did in Milan, and I played there with Michael Blake about 4 years before that, with his large project that he had, Kingdom of Champa. I don't know if you ever heard about that, but yeah, that's a whole nother story. Teo Macero produced a record. Anyway, so yeah, it was like a script. It was like a play almost, because you had these different things that would happen at different points. And sometimes you would say, I just want you to come in, burning here, and we create these different duets, but it was scripted, it was planned, but to the audience, it would still just sound like complete, improvisation,
Right. But there was structure and thought that went into it, a lot.
And the irony is this, that we would always sound check. He would play something or when he was warming up, he'd play something by James P. Johnson, like a waltz or something, or he'd say, let's do this. One time, and I did they had that series at the community church in New York. The AACM does a series they do on Fridays, and they usually have 2 sets. And one time I did a duo thing with him in the first set. It was total improvisation. But we were warming up, getting a sound check. And he said, play some blues, Carrott. And he started walking, and I blah, 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 blah. So his daughter told me later, she said, Daddy came up to me, he said, did you hear Bryan Carrott play them blues? Because the stuff that I'd done with him was, it was always this expanded concept and except for when I played in the big band at the beginning, but even that, I didn't do that much playing, like solo playing this is one of the things he was interested in personal sound and a sense of exploration. He would say, and then you play in that section, explore your instrument. This is a guy like he's played, and I was so glad I got to hear this when we did the gig in Wesley and we took the train. So I was hearing stories, about some of the people he played. Oh yeah, Maynard. Yeah, I worked with Maynard. He was all right, but he was a nice cat, but Woody Herman was, he was kind of like a commercial, he did blah, blah, blah. Like he worked with all these cats, and he even had this really funny story where he was checking out, he was like 19 or 20, him and a couple of friends, they had a little trio. They were checking out Prez playing at this place in Chicago. And he was talking about how eccentric Prez is practically dragging his sax on the, in the case on the ground when he's walking, And then when he came in, he sat with his back to the room, this lady sitting at the table drinking his coffee. And he says, then he finally gets up on the stage. He's playing with the house rhythm section. And he says, he keep taking the horn out of his mouth and saying, somebody save me from these schoolgirls. And then he would keep playing. And so, like Mual said, he stepped to him on the break and says, I got a little trio here. We'd like to back you up for a tune or so, if you don't mind. He said, well, come on, and then he's playing with them and he says, now that's more like it. And he's playing. But somebody saved me from these schoolgirls. When Mual said that, like he said, Oscar Peterson was playing with Lester one time, and he started playing these substitute changes, and Press turned around to him and said, Lady P, where you where y'all at? You call everybody lady.
You can say motherfucker in this video.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Well,
Where you at? Well, Bryan, I got to tell you, there's so much more to talk about, but it's going to have to be another day. And I know we got to do part 2. So I have one last question for you tonight. Very quickly, I want to thank our long-working, wonderful producer in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas area, Herschel McWilliams, for doing audio and video and making this website exist and supporting this interview series, which is really great. I want to tell everybody, regardless of the holidays, Convo Improvvo keeps going. Tomorrow, we're going to tape our interview on December 21st with drummer Mike Clark. On December 27th, guitarist John Stoll, and getting closer and closer to the Biden times, and away from Satan, the ridiculous, insane orange maggot. I
think we're already in the Biden times, man.
Well, I wish it was quicker, man. I don't, Anyway, in January, we have an amazing array of musicians. January 3rd, start off 2021 with a bang with George Cables. The next week on the 10th, Kirk Lightsey, all the way from Paris. On the 17th, Mama J, great singer Jay Clayton. On the 24th, burning trumpet player, originally from Baltimore, Alex Norris. Then on the 31st, before we take a winter break for the month of February, Joe Bowie from Defunct.
Woo!
And then very quickly, I can't remember the dates, but I just want to let everybody know, I think when we come back in March, we have, among other people, saxophonist Tom Scott, baritone sax master Gary Smullian, trumpeter Freddie Hendricks, and we've already gotten yeses from Dave Liebman and Adam Nussbaum. So we're going to schedule them also. And we're hoping that during this time of quarantine and difficulty and suffering, that we can bring everybody a little joy and a little great jazz video with the stories and the lives and the hilarity and the creativity of people like my buddy here, Bryan Carrott.
Yeah, it's beautiful what you're doing, Rob. And
thank you, Bryan.
You know, I hope it returns in a big way, you know.
Yeah, well, there has been the thought. I mean, I'm pretty dark about it, but there are musicians, colleagues, friends of mine who have said, listen, man, when this shit comes back, we're never going to stop working because everybody's going to be starving for live music. Fingers crossed. My last question to you of the evening before we go out with our band with Kim Clark, the last thing we're going to play is Magnets with one of our many drummers, George Gray, known for playing with Abdullah Ibrahim. It's a TV show we shot in Queens. You remember for that jerk Alexian who didn't pay us for about 5 months?
Oh, you remember the name.
Oh, yeah. And I remember it was snowing on the way into the studio, so it must have been winter. But you're going to hear Kenny Barron's Voyage with Bryan Carrott on vibes, Kim Clark on acoustic bass, Rob Scheps on tenor saxophone, and George Gray on drums. And before we do that, here's my last question. Kind of out of the jazz realm, what is it like to play mallets and percussion on the Broadway show The Lion King? And are you one of the most important people in the orchestra because of the marimba and the xylophone being descendants of the African balafon and the need for the sound of wooden mallet instruments to create this African vibe in the show?
Well, of course, I'm biased. I would say that the element of the marimba is one of the most important. Now, if you go to the show and hear the mix that they do live, you don't necessarily get, I'm told that, you know, I've been told that before by percussionists though. So, you know, but originally, like, I don't know if you've seen the show in the theater on Broadway.
I have not.
There's including the drummer, Tommy Igo, Tommy's probably not playing the show anymore. I know he's one of the conductors, but there's 4 additional percussionists and 2 of them in the upper tier. You know, it's like part of the show. And originally when they conceived of it, they wanted the marimbas up there. They wanted the marimba percussionists. They have 2 mallet percussionists who switch off on a lot of different things. So what ended up happening was that I became the first sub for the show. So I was Valerie Naranjo's sub.
And Valerie from the Saturday Night Live band.
Saturday Night Live band, and she had a lot to do with scoring some of those parts. As a matter of fact, that was kind of a standoff kind of thing. But anyway, I think they conceived of it that way, you know. But that's not an easy. It's not an easy chair to fill because it's not common that a mallet player can also play shekere and hand drums and all.
So does this mean it's not like the gig, like a Broadway gig where you just need a sub on French horn or on cello. You need a real specialty percussionist with very disparate skills to sub on that show. So probably they're extremely discerning about who gets to sub on percussion on that show. And they need to know that they're prepared with all those different skills, right?
Yeah. I mean, like anything else, there's politics, you know. They might, you know how somebody comes in shadows, like they sit and watch you play the show. I think I did that with Valerie once, and then I was practicing it, and when I had to, I was the first sub for the show because she was committed to Saturday Night Live, so she needed sub on Saturdays, like as soon as that season started, which that was a whole point of contention because they didn't normally have subs that early in the run. Right. And the first day I did a matinee and an evening show, you know, and at the time I got there, Valerie wasn't there because she was at Saturday Night Live, and you know, it was like I had to hold attention at bay because like I had to focus on just trying to get this shit right.
Well, there's a lot of fuss budget shit on Broadway, you know, for those who haven't been in it. Just like you say, I mean, mostly it's very, very good musicians. And sometimes it's very good musicians as the conductor. sometimes.
Yeah.
But what I would say is there is an expectation of perfection now. My friends who played Broadway 30, 40 years ago, older cats said, oh, they used to let us make mistakes 6 shows in a row before they would start giving us shit. And now if you don't play it perfectly, the first time as a sub, with the weight of the world and the tension on your shoulders, you could be out. And so, I mean, I guess my question is less about the politics, but just more about being the mallet player on a show that has an African flavor or a story to it. You know, how do the marimbas relate into the story of the Lion King?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I felt that they had it, you know, they worked it out. It worked into it very nicely. In particular, the number "He Lives in You," you know, it's really a point where the marimba players have this ostinato that goes on, and Valerie actually scored it. You know, see, a lot of this stuff was created initially for the movie, and it was a guy just on keyboards, and he was just, you know, messing around. Like, he didn't know how he came up with the thing. So Valerie created something that really worked. You know, somebody, I had seen a score early where somebody tried to imitate what was in the movie recording, and it was just too rigid. You know, it was like a classical exercise. She hooked it up and went, but you had to have control of the 4 mallet thing. And, you know, your time, you know, everything, all the other essentials that you need to be a decent musician, you know, like you couldn't be, have time issues or anything like that. And then the same thing with playing the shaker. There's a part where the shaker guy, the guy in the upper tier, and you have to hit the shaker at the same time, you know, with just the African voices singing. You know, but you got a guy conducting like this, you know, whereas in Africa, you would just play, you know
right.
what I mean? You don't really...
So one of the hardest things about playing Lion King would be the demands of coordination.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you had to, you know, like, for instance, they had somebody that was trying to learn. He was taking because he had to wear headphones because, you know, and the people in the upper tier had to do that because you had to, the sound travel is... creates a disparity. So
yeah. Oh, Brian, I'm sorry. I have a question actually that came in. Well, it says, and I know these folks. I haven't played with them in a long time. The question says, there's another vibraphone player, Diana Harold, who has come through KC quite a bit.
Diana was one of the subs also.
And the question was Brian on the show with her? She's married to the drummer Grisha Alexiev, and I worked with the 2 of them together in the Jazz Composers Alliance Big Band in Boston. I guess they were there first. But yeah, so specialty vibes. And Brian, we got to cut it. I'm so sorry. There's so much more I want to talk to you about. So will you come back on Convo Improvvo?
Well, I'd be honored to, man. You know, if you could take it.
Well, I can take it. Let's put it this way, Brian. The way I look at it is, I mean, you know, our producer is long suffering. We do 2-hour interviews usually. But what I have to say is, you know, if you're going to watch a Bobby Watson or Roger Rosenberg or Sheila Jordan or Bryan Carrott interview, if 2 hours is too much for you, watch it like a mini series. You know, like Netflix binge, man. You know, half an hour of Bryan Carrott here, and then you can watch more another night. And so I think the archive that we're creating of all these interviews with these incredible living creative musicians hopefully will be valuable to people now, and it will be valuable to people after some of these folks pass away. Just a real document, not a 10-minute interview at a radio station, but a couple of hours of really getting into it like we have and really talking about it. And I think we ran long just because your stories are so good, man.
Yeah, sorry about that, man.
No, don't be, man. I mean, you know, it's... I've learned a lot, like I do every week, and as I'm sure I will from Mike Clark tomorrow. He swings his butt. A guy really swings his butt.
Yeah, even Mike. Hey, listen to this, man.
Yeah.
That thing, that tribute for JD, right? For Justin Jojo.
So
the big band just finished sound checking on the stage. Arturo's conducting the big band, and Kenny Washington's on drums. So now Marcus is gonna sound check.
Marcus Miller.
Yeah, Marcus and Kenny were really close, and I think Kenny taught him a lot about jazz, and they used to hang out. So Marcus starts warming up, and he starts playing the bass line of Actual Proof that Mike Clark played on.
With Herbie.
And, yeah, I'm sitting in between Marcus Gilmore and Eric McPherson, two incredible drummers. We're just talking, right? And Marcus, you know, it sounds exactly like the record. These guys both, like, their necks look like they stretched out, like they went to look. They were in shock, you know, like something is wrong with the world. Like, did Kenny Washington just play that? You know, like, because everybody knows him as, you know, this totally jazz police guy.
Bebop master, and really seems to just kind of dig that period more than anything.
That's what it is, but it doesn't mean that other people can't play. People can't, you know, we were in the high school band together. Of course, he could play funk. He played funk with Marcus.
You know what? I'm really glad to hear that story. That's funny. And we're going to have to tell that to his little brother, the great electric bassist, Reggie Washington, who's been a friend of mine since I got to New York. Because way back then, man, in the late 80s, Reggie was playing with Steve Coleman and Five Elements. I said, man, that's great, Reggie, that you're doing that, man. I love that band. I love that music of Steve's. And he says, yeah, you know, my brother Kenny said to me, I really shouldn't put this in the interview, but, you know, I'm known for opening my mouth. And at least I've been fighting, you know, the evil institutions in the White House for the last 4 years. You got to stand up for justice. So I said, Reggie, man, congratulations, playing with Steve Coleman. He says, yeah, you know what Kenny said to me? He said, man, why are you playing that popcorn music?
Kenny was an old man from high school, man.
Well, but so I think it's very interesting, in spite of whatever Kenny's viewpoint might be on bebop versus funk and other kinds of music, it's great to hear that he can really play it. And the way that Kenny knows more records than God is, of course, he knew Herbie Hancock Thrust. I mean, we're going to talk to Mike Clark about Mike Clark told me that his nickname in Japan is Mr. Actual Proof. That's what they call it. And we're going to have to cut it there. So Bryan, it's been lovely chatting with you, man. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming on Convo Improvvo.
It's my pleasure, man. That's all love, you know. We love the music and we love each other, and you know,
we'll hope for better days, and we'll hope for live music to come back where we can all convene and do this again.
Yeah,
no doubt. Thanks to our producer Herschel McWilliams in Kansas City. For Live Jazz KC, I'm Rob Scheps. That's Bryan Carrott, the Carrott Mon, and we're going to go out with me and him playing together in Magnets with Kim Clark and George Gray. TV show from Queens, New York, your birthplace, your hometown. Kenny Barron's Voyage, and there might be a little funk after that, but we will see what we get to. Anyway, good night. Bryan, love you, man. Thanks for coming on.
You too, man. Thank you.
Soon.
All right.